Good morning.
Morning.
Hello, Kayse.
Hi, great to be here.
So, Kayse, the reason why we just hit record is because we have like 10-minute conversations with people that are better than the show, and we never get it on tape. And especially with somebody like you, I'm like, shit, man, if we talk any longer, we're going to totally miss half the show. Like, we gotta get going.
And Matt and I, like we said, we already had a meeting today with one of our buddies, and
Good
it's like kind of
fucking
a
God.
head trip to even keep up with him. So we're already like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. And Kayse, I don't believe in coincidence. I really don't. I feel like that's just our lazy way of describing something else, right? And I certainly believe in the power of intention. And this morning happened because you were coming on the show. Like, it couldn't have happened any other day. He actually canceled last week. And so him rescheduling for this. So let me paint a picture for you here. And Tom, stop me if I...
No, man, you do the thing.
He has a chair, and he's coming on the show to talk about this, but this chair has apparently become a portal to the quantum reality of the universe and everything that exists. By almost universal reply,
The most mundane people are having spiritual awakenings,
correct,
by using this technology.
and it's really crazy, but a lot of the work you're doing, a lot of the work that people like you are doing the same stuff, right? Like, and so it's, again, there's no such thing as coincidence. There's no such thing as an accident. Like, this all happened exactly as it was supposed to prime us for today's conversation, right? I mean, put it this way. He has guys that are working on vibroacoustic therapy that would sit in this bed and in real time change the axis of sound waves in real time to maximize what it's doing to your body, your mind, your heart.
With about 10 other technologies in there. It's not just the sound, it's red light, it's
PMF, it's
guided meditation. It's, I mean, hydrogen gas is insane.
But see, this is a mechanical thing, right? And as much as I love it, and we're going to have a whole episode on it, probably two, when we go to his little Airstream and take a live tour of the thing, which we've both used before. It's great. But a few years ago, got into microdosing through a friend of a friend of a friend, kind of thing. And when we do the show, you might imagine we talk to a lot of people doing a lot of things, right? And microdosing comes up, but it's always one of these like, oh, I take my vitamin D, I take some zinc, and I take a microdose. Like, it's not really dealt with like at I don't want to say a cognitive level, because everyone's got the cognition that kind of precursored that taking of that microdose. Like, they've already done the mental.
Matt, I'd agree with you there. I think there's a certain group that would be open to microdosing,
but
where others might not.
And they don't peel it back individually, is what I'm saying. Like, they don't talk about it any more than I would talk about vitamin C, right? Like, it's kind of like, it's just a thing I do. So when your thing came onto my orbit, I was like, we've got to get her on here, because I just want to have a conversation about microdosing. Like, I just, like, just that. It's so, and enter Kayse Gehret, right? Like, and that's a very long introduction to today.
And Kayse, we normally ask how you got here. So if you want to give us your origin story, we don't do a big intro. We're like, let them tell it. So please go.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm fascinated already. And I think it's a testament to, there's many ways in, I think is the point. And so sometimes people will find it through their mind. Sometimes people will find it through music and art, and other people through microdosing. So there's many, many ways and paths in. So yeah, absolutely. My origin story. So I have been in the healing arts for 29 years. Crazy.
Can we break down what that means real quick? Like, what's the healing arts?
So healing arts are anything, to me, they are the professions that are unified in moving people forward in their health, their healing, their growth, their wellness, and our evolution, is how I would define the healing art. So I started way back when in energy work and massage therapy. most of my 20s, I spent building a practice around those areas. And I'm so, so grateful because I feel like where we are as a collective right now, the body is where most people start. Most people's health is referenced around their physical health right now. So I'm grateful for having had that as a foundation. Fast forward many years, I'd opened studios. I had healing art studios in Northern California. We had just opened our fourth one, doing a broad array of modalities: massage, meditation, mindfulness, cacao ceremony, sound healing, all the things. And we had just opened our fourth studio when the pandemic happened. So during that time, I had been microdosing personally for some time to great effect. I had a grand mal seizure disorder that had begun when I was 19, kind of the big scary kind where you go unconscious and scare everybody around you. And I had been medicated for that, but they had never found kind of a biological cause for my seizures. And so I had always stayed away from drugs. I was very nervous about doing anything to my mind that would further
Nancy Reagan fucked us all up, didn't she? Yeah.
Apparently half of Hollywood too. Sorry, I'll swing at her. She's not swinging back.
Yeah. Right.
Now that I pissed off our one listener.
Yeah.
So when I came across the concept of microdosing and taking small, gentle, subperceptual doses versus a high dose experience, that kind of caught my interest. And so when I started it, I did it more like you described, kind of as a spiritual supplement, if you will, along with other vitamins. That. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And immediately I had a whole host of benefits come in and gifts, as well as after a few months, I was like, I haven't had a seizure. I haven't had an aura, and I never had one since. So I was able to heal my seizures through microdosing.
That's amazing.
And had been doing it for some time quietly with a few people in my life. But when my studios were shut down, I suddenly had to do something to bring healing to the world that didn't involve touching people or gathering in a group. So back in 2020, I put together a couple pilot groups of a microdosing group experience online, and it was fantastic from the start. So fun, so fascinating, so effective. And so fast forward, now we've had just over 1,100 people through that program. And we have a global community of people all over the world now that come together and gather around this practice for mental, physical, emotional, spiritual development, all the reasons.
That's wild. So that's like not that's a cohort now, man. You got a whole thing going on. Yeah,
pretty big group.
That's a group, right? I mean, that's more than just like a hobby, right? I mean,
and I'm assuming all walks of life and everything, right? It's not just a standard.
It is. That's what's so fun. Our age range is 19 to 93 now.
Jesus.
And all different backgrounds. So a lot of times people, especially now, think it's people who are just coming for mental health, but that's actually just a fraction of the people that are coming and why they're coming. And the beauty is, like, you come for one thing and you kind of get a whole lot more.
So, okay, can you touch on that a little bit more? Can you tell us kind of what, because I'm sure like we all, and Matt has his reasons for doing it, and, there's reasons I'm interested in it, but like, what do people find beyond, let's say, creativity, inspiration, those kind of things?
Well, I think a lot of people, especially back a few years ago, people were coming during the pandemic, were feeling a lot of kind of existential angst, depression, anxiety. And so people were led. They were also kind of leaning into habits that they knew were not helping them. They were leaning on the cannabis a little too hard. They were leaning on the wine a little bit much. So
I have no idea what you're talking about.
What?
Right?
And like the pandemic, existential dread is over.
Woman, get out of my head.
No one sent me a memo.
Yeah. My God.
Right. So what people found, though, is over time, what makes it so different than anything they've done before is you start with one intention, right? And you work with that. But it's evolving constantly. So you might come from your migraines at first, but then your migraines heal. And then maybe 6 months later, you're working on some other aspect of self. So what I'm finding lately is people come for a whole host of reasons, but because we're in this kind of evolutionary shift real time right now, people's process is faster than I've ever seen it. I mean, I've supported people in healing for so long now, but I've never seen people's results happen so quickly as they are right now.
So do you think that's a consciousness thing?
I do.
A collective, Sorry.
No, can we put a little, I don't want to sharpen this point too much, but I do want to sharpen it a little bit. Like when we say consciousness, and I'm actually asking a question through my own reflection here, but I see, we kind of generically use the word consciousness and we don't really put specificity behind it. And I think for me, in this particular regard, it's like a conscious opening of a window to kind of see what's on the other side. And more importantly, a conscious like acknowledgement that like something might come through the window and I'm okay with whatever that is because I'm just curious enough now where I wasn't before, right? Like, I'm like, okay, let's see what happens. Like, I don't need this doesn't need to be a home run. I don't need to have birds fly out and an aura come out of my head. Like nothing, like there doesn't have to be this grand moment. It could just be a thing.
Oh man, if it's not going to do that, what's the point?
Like, I guess, but
I'm just going to go play video games.
But I guess when we say consciousness in this, that's how I view this a little bit more. It wasn't necessarily like our conscious did anything dramatically different. It just was open to a possibility that it wasn't before. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely off base here.
That framing of it. I love that framing because I think traditionally when we think of that, we kind of strangle it a little bit too much. Like
exactly.
We come into life with too much like fixed expectation. And that's what I found with this practice. People come in with a narrow range of what they think is going to happen when something so much more expansive is actually possible if you just hold out for possibility. I see people bringing that framing way more now than I have in the past. So,
and we had a woman on who did ketamine therapy, but she's got a lot of experience with like DMT and a whole bunch of other stuff. And she basically, you can now microdose on DMT through like with an MCT oil carrier or something like a pen, right? And I was like, hey, I'm kind of curious about that. She goes, you know what? What's cool about that is you can just sort of like sip at the universe a little bit. You don't have to ingest the whole thing.
Yeah, you don't have to get skyrocketed out. And
she said she actually used a great analogy. She's like, you're just awakening that pathway that's been dormant in most of us. And I sort of took that immediately and applied it to everything in life. Basically, it wasn't just microdosing, but it's like, yeah, there's all these things that I think we know, like our body knows. Like how many times have we been through? I mean, if you want to get real weird, how many times have we chosen human form and come back and done this again, right? Like like if we keep coming back, like we have this memory, it's there. We just have to like dust it off, I don't know how weird we want to get, but anyway, like
I can't get the neurotheology guy on. He says he doesn't do. So we got to leave that one simmer for a bit.
Yeah, we'll get him on. Keep chiseling away at that guy. Yeah, but you see what I'm saying, Kayse? Like, I mean, I'd love to get. You have to see this in your practice, right? Like, you've got to see people like kind of nibbling at this, right? Like,
well, absolutely. Yep. That brings up two things. A lot of people, after they start, they do it for a couple of weeks and they're like, it's new, but it also feels really familiar.
Sure.
Like a coming home quality. Like I'm remembering things that I've done before. And to your point, sometimes it's in the past, sometimes it's everything we've ever done is kind of coded in our DNA. So It's awakening that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they said even the ocean, they found this whole study recently that the North Atlantic has a 20-year memory. Like it could actually react and respond to shit that happened 20 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? Like it's all part of a thing, right? And if it's all part of a thing, then it all could potentially, and just that concept alone, like assigning memory to an ocean, like just if you can accept that as a possibility, that right there is exactly what we're kind of talking about, right? Like it's like, I didn't do anything crazy. I didn't visit a neurotheologist. I just said, okay, well, what happens if the ocean has a memory?
Mm-hmm.
Like what happens? What if? And I think that like, the asking what if dies somewhere right around like, your 8th or 9th birthday when your parents are like, all right, you're almost a teenager. Fuck it. Let's get you out of here. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, you start hardwiring this stuff and you never go back to that whimsical, like, what if, right? And I don't know, there's a lot of sage wisdom in what if, I think, right? If you really dive in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so many people come to these kind of quote unquote alternative practices when they've tried everything else. Mm-hmm. Right. And then they come and some things aren't related to this lifetime. They're in their DNA, they're in cells, they're conditioned, they're from epigenetic connections to our ancestry. So if you're healing something that was based on your great grandmother, no modern health care is going to be able to address that.
Yeah.
Right.
There was a lot of work done on the epigenetic passing along of hormetic stress response from the
specifically
Holocaust.
With longevity.
From the Holocaust, that like where those people are long gone, but that stress
we're actually generating longer life expectancies now because of that.
Which was actually one of those concepts that really took like almost like a microdose to kind of take in, because you're like, wait a minute, how the hell, like
what the hell
like
did
what
grandma
the fuck are
do?
you talking about? Like how is like I mean that it's like a wild concept, but it can imprint that fast and hold on for at least what are we at, like 3 generations from then too, something like that. Like I mean that's kind of still here, and they keep doing it. Like as progeny come on for the next generation, they're like testing the same things and seeing that I think we're at 3 was the last I checked, but it keeps going. So
absolutely,
20 generations after the Holocaust, could we still see a bit of that? I don't know. Like that's just crazy though that we can. So if that could happen, what else is, to your point, Kayse, like what else is like rummaging around in there that we don't even know what the hell the cause was?
I think this whole topic, I get excited because it turns so much of our traditional modern thinking on its head, right? Like all of us are dealing with fixing of problems that we think are genetic, that we're doomed toward, this ran in my family, so I have to have this. When actually it's a possibility of, if we are able to go back to that root cause and reorient ourselves around possibility, we can eradicate a lot of these things that we're seeing in people that Western medicine can't seem to touch.
And it's like crazy. Like, we had this woman on that did tapping, right? And I found tapping like I did not volunteer for that. I was in a therapy session and my therapist was like, I'm going to take you through something. Have you ever done tapping? And I was like, no, but I'm like, look, I'm an open-minded guy. I'll try anything. But like 5 seconds into that, I'm like, I feel like a fucking idiot. Like I'm sitting here tapping like crazy, but a week goes by. We come back on for our follow-up and she goes, how do you feel? I'm like, I'm not going to lie to you. You totally fucking like Merlin magicked my ass, because I don't know what the fuck changed, but like everything was different. Like everything was different. And she said, and she has this little smile, like this little kind of smirk. And she's like, yeah, I know. Like, and she was not impressed by it at all. But I was like, you blew my fucking mind open. And now like once or twice a week, I'll just do like a 5-minute tap. Now you can do it yourself, like, because once you figure it out, but like, what is that, right? You know what I mean? Like that is, some of it might be placebo. Okay, let's accept that as a possibility. But like, there's also this thing that like, the answer is here in me all the time. And as the guy from this morning said, it's like, you chose this body with all the problems that comes with it, right? And you chose that for a couple reasons, but one of them is that you are text capable of handling it. You just don't think you can.
Yeah.
And so like part of the challenge is finding out like, well, how do you think I'm text capable of handling a cancer diagnosis or a dying child or all the terrible things, like, don't know the answer, but you do, like, like it's in there somewhere, and it's a weird concept. But like when I look at microdosing, I kind of say, you know what, this just keeps that pathway to that what if squeaky clean and wide open. Right. Like, and that's the best way I could describe it. And like people like Tom, who haven't really gone down this road, it's hard to...
I did some, but then I remember my wife was like, why are you so happy? And I'm like, oh, I microdosed. And she was like, you got to fucking tell me that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, all right, I'll put the mushrooms away.
Yeah. But well, just about that too. Like my wife is not super thrilled with me doing this, and I think my brother, my family, they're a little confused by it. But like,
why does it concern her?
I think it's the old mindset. I think they're still stuck in the Nancy Reagan said it was bad. I had a Dare T-shirt or some shit like that, thinking that. There's, and Matt and I have had this conversation with a bunch of people. There's a big difference between, and I'm not even vilifying this, but there's a big difference between me eating a whole bunch of mushrooms and going to a Fish concert versus what I'm doing it for almost, I don't want to say performance enhancement because that seems to belittle it, but like this, in that really realm, making me more human,
but in a mass descriptive parlance, performance enhancing is the most Luddite example that you can tell anybody to understand, right? Like you can get everybody to understand that. And so like, I'm okay borrowing dumbed down language to explain it if that's what it takes to get the message across.
Are you saying abuse of steroids is okay? Is that what I heard? Like, and then it goes in that direction, it's not, I think there's a lot of fear, and I think there's a lot of fear with a lot of things. And some of that we can argue that that's programming by the people that said it was bad in the first place.
And Kayse, I think the add-on to that is, and we've seen this, and you certainly 29 years of healing people like this, you have to see this. Press back on some of these things is the mirror looking them back and saying, if this works, you have to deal with that. And people not understanding, not wanting to actually deal with it if it comes back that, oh, here, we've identified the problem. It's as clear as the nose on my face. But now you got to do the work to figure that. And I don't think many people want to do that. And I'm not blaming my wife for that. She'd probably kill me if she knew I was trying to like throw her in.
Well, your wife actually listens to the show too. Mine does not. Mine's like, what do you, Matt, talk about down there? I'm like, I'm not.
Yeah. I can't fault her or anybody actually for thinking like that. But what I can do is constantly encourage people to open up that what if pathway, because I'm like, if you can, then, like, you don't have to go as deep as Tom and I do. And Tom and I only go as deep as we do. And there's other people that go much deeper. Like our friend this morning is, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench where I'm still, knee deep at the beach, And so like that's the right place for you right now. Right? And all you can do is sort of encourage people to continue to explore the potential of
at least show up at the beach.
At least show up at the beach.
Yeah. To use your example, I'd love to share one of my clients, because I think it's such a beautiful demonstration of kind of the Trojan horse element that you said, like using performance enhancing kind of is the Trojan horse that gets people curious. One of my clients is very senior in government, and for obvious reasons could not share this, and was very gently exploring it, but was coming for, had a big high pressure career thing he had to do in 6 months from now. So came to practice for that, around that, wanted to be as good as he possibly could be, articulate in this big speech that he was to give. And 1 year later, when I talk to him now, he says, why is everyone not doing this?
Yeah.
Like, it's such an unfair advantage he feels like he has in all areas of life. And so when he came in, he was worried about, because of all the stigma, am I going to feel out of it? Am I going to feel trippy? Am I going to feel like I can't be off my game ever? And now fast forward, you see that it actually makes you better in every way. Yes, you
not only are
better.
You not off your game, but you fucking run the game.
Hey,
like,
Kayse, can I step this back?
You are the game.
Please.
Can we talk about like what compounds specifically you're referring to in this case, or in general? Is there?
I was going to get into the hardware.
A couple of ways.
There's many medicines you can microdose.
Yeah.
I specifically work with mushrooms.
Okay.
I love working with mushrooms, and one of the reasons I love working with mushrooms is I feel like they are a soul medicine. Each medicine has its own spirit and its own benefits, but I love mushrooms to start with, because it really gets down kind of at the root of what is going on with people. It's a soul level thing before people start layering on the more ascension medicines.
So when you say mushroom, I almost wanted to Karnak this and put the envelope to my head and be like, you're going to say mushrooms. The reason I'm laughing about that is like a lot of people in the practitioner space do gravitate towards mushrooms first. And I'm curious, what causes that? Like, why?
I think it's very natural. People are intuitively drawn to that first for a reason. Mushrooms are the mycelium. They're kind of the foundation of everything in our forest. It's like, oftentimes when I say, imagine what mushrooms do in the forest. They do that to us. So they're shedding a lot of density and fear and past tropes and lives and these things. And so it really, really helps people at a foundational, fundamental level. And then you layer your healing on top of that. Like,
because I personally am more in tune with the LSD side. And
which is funny, because LSD in its plant source is ergot, which is another fungus.
Yeah.
So, and if we look at like what mushrooms do, right, collectively, one mushroom, like what was the biggest one? It was like almost an entire forest. It's a communication network, right?
Miles and miles.
Yeah.
Which was wild.
It's insane.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was crazy to see that. And then what was that one woman? I can't remember. I think she won a Nobel Prize for this, but she actually traced, what was it, a molecule from one mushroom to another, like that were nearby, proving that it actually, they were communicating.
The same mushroom,
literally,
and they were talking
information back and forth. And I was like, that is bonkers. Like,
one thing that's so fun to watch is people, once they start microdosing, they become more permeable and psychic in that they communicate differently. That's why you get these little glimpses of how we're going to be able to communicate in the future now and at a very baby level. And so people are like, suddenly I'm in meetings and I know what people are going to say before they say them, or I can think of someone across the country and boom, there they are. They call.
Yeah.
So that happens. There's much serendipities that happen, like this morning.
Yeah. Well, that's what I said. I don't believe in anything that uses the word coincidence, right? Like, because I'm like, no, we're all connected and this shit's happening for a reason. And in ways I can't yet describe, we're controlling that. I just don't quite know where the steering wheel is. I just kind of, I can kind of semi-guide the car. I just can't really, I haven't really gotten an articulation down.
Matt's already out in space and I'm here going like, what's the most mundane thing I can ask?
Yeah.
Which is like, so a guy that's about 240 pounds, what kind of dosage should he be looking at? I'm like, I want the textbook.
Yeah. But I mean, I get, so talking about that real quick, Kayse, I was going to get into what I'll call the hardware side of things, which is the specificity of compound and everything. When you look at, like, say, LSD, ketamine, DMT, 5-DMAO, like all the different versions of things that you could microdose on, like, can we kind of, like, I don't know if this is too reductive, but like rank order them, or sort of like
if you put them in octane order, which one's the jet fuel, which one is the like the 2-stroke engine fuel?
Yeah, right. Like, talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it depends. Everybody's coming in at a different level and for different things. And so there's really no black and white answer. That's what, for all of this, in terms of dosing and protocols and when to do it and when to start, what medicine to start with, it's so uniquely, and sometimes there'll be a reason to work with 2 medicines. Like, for instance, many of my journey guide colleagues love working with MDMA and mushrooms together.
Yeah, that's a very popular combo.
Yeah, and that's very intentional. And they use their expertise and their intuition to know which medicine when. And so, to rank and order them.
And that's why I said this isn't the right answer. This isn't the right question. But, like, I guess, like, I see a huge difference between LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin, right? And I would microdose on those almost from a self-knowledge without having any vocabulary to pass that data on to somebody else. Like, I couldn't say on this call, like, hey, today I chose MDMA because of X. I have this sort of inner awareness that that's the right answer. And I'd love to get articulation in my own mind on that, but maybe that's what I meant to ask. Like, what's your reflection on that?
I totally see what you're saying. So, for instance, if someone came to me and they're like, I am an engineer and I have a huge project coming up and I have a huge team of people to lead and I have a ton that I have to remember in the next 3 months, I would probably say lean toward LSD for them in that situation. For somebody that is really wanting to work on healing and some long-standing chronic stuff that they're trying to move past in their life, and they have the capacity to feel more and concentrate more on their healing, I would lead more toward mushrooms for that. If someone's in, like, an acute situation where they're having severe mental health challenges and need to get stabilized, I might recommend ketamine in that circumstance.
I got you.
It's very interesting because what you're doing is just on a microdose level talking about set and setting, right? Here's what I need to go into. Here's what I got coming down the pipe. Here's where I'm at. And all of that's going to flavor the experience as well. So you're just matching a drug sommelier, if you will.
Yeah. The micro sommelier, yeah. We'll let you have the trademark, Kayse, too.
Yeah, you can have it.
But that's actually like an interesting way of thinking about it though, right? Like we have, bud tenders and wine sommeliers and people that pair like a desired outcome with an input variable. And that's kind of doing the same thing.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it.
That is fun. So once people get in like dosing and whatnot, I've had some very spirited debates about what qualifies as a microdose versus a macrodose. And I know this sub-perceptual thing has always been sort of the bar, but I actually push back on that. And it used to be gently. Now I'm like kind of more aggressively pushing back on that because I'm like, well, I get what you're saying. The spirit of that comment is to say that I'm not tripping my balls off, right? Like I'm like, okay, great.
You're able to function on this plane.
However, the perceptual benefits of me doing it are why I'm doing it. So it is 100% perceptual. Like, so like, it's hard for me to be like on board with the sub-perceptual train. Cause I'm like, no, that's not accurate. Like I very much perceive the presence of these compounds, but I don't perceive them in ooh, I'm high or ooh, I'm tripping. I perceive them as I'm a fucking ninja right now. And I am operating on all wavelengths at the same time. Right? Like, does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think in this world, when we're talking about this, there's a lot of aspects to this work that we don't have English words that can correctly capture them in a lot of fronts. Yeah, absolutely. Dosing is so, I love it. I love working with someone to figure out their dose because it's so intuitive and it's so nuanced and it's so based on where their soul is.
Totally.
And so I've worked with people who have 40-year contemplative practices who use baby. Like you would think like, what is going to happen with that?
Well, they're so in tune with it. I got to imagine it doesn't take a lot to move their needle. Right?
Exactly. So people who come in and I often ask them like in their intake on the spectrum of how flexible and bendy are you versus how rigid and structured are you? And then people often laugh at that point. And they're like, I've eaten the same lunch for the last 14 years or something like that. So people that I often describe it.
Kayse's like, so I just added 3 more drops to your.
No, we're not microdosing you. We're blowing your doors off.
Dude, you are.
Don't do anything for the next 12 hours.
Yeah.
So people who are very mental, who are very analytical, very linear, who are very structured, who are very controlling, often liken it to like if you have a pond and your pond is frozen over, by just a little thin layer of ice, you'll probably need a smaller dose. If your pond is like a layer of ice 10 feet deep, you're going to need a much higher microdose. And some people might even need to do a journey first. To kind of get enough
punch a hole in that ice. Yeah. And it's funny, my wife constantly makes fun of me for this because I am so tuned into my physical self that like any micro fluctuations at all. And I'm talking about I forget, Tom, whatever that word is where your heart kind of like
palpitations. That was when we were in New York, right? You were like, I must have had too much coffee or I'm dehydrated. I'm like, I'm constantly having too much coffee and dehydrated. That is status quo for me.
I can feel everything. So when I go out with friends and we've done microdosing, I'll take, 1/11 of a hit of LSD, man. I'm like good for 12 hours. And other people take like 6 or 7 of the same drop and they're like, I barely feel this. And I'm like, I've been doing this work on myself for years. Like I don't need a lot. Like it's like my body's just like, nope, that's exactly right. And it's, I don't know what else to say. Like, I just don't need it.
Absolutely. Another big misnomer that's out there floating on the interwebs that in a lot of precautions and harm reduction conversations in this field is you have to take breaks and you have to take time off because you'll develop a tolerance, right? I have actually seen the more you work with these medicines, the veil gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And so people don't actually need to work with medicines as often, and they often can work at an increasingly lower dose over time.
I mean, I need almost nothing.
We had Jason Snell on, who's like this brilliant musician. And, he was heavy in the electronic music scene, did a lot of drugs. And at some point he did LSD and whatever talked to him said, hey, you're done. You don't need this anymore.
Yeah. Which I thought was like one of the most insightful things ever, because he said he did that once, like the second to last time. it said, you've gotten everything, you don't need to come back.
Yeah.
And then the next time he came back again, they're like, we told you. You're come back here.
What are you doing here? Yeah.
Right. And that was 20 years ago. And he's like, I haven't had to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually curious with a guy like him, like, would microdosing not be a way to sort of, I don't want to say do another rep at the gym kind of thing, but sort of dust that off just to kind of see, because I do think that there is benefit to continually going back to this place, right? Like, I agree with you, the veil thing. I mean, if I go a week without microdosing, I can function great. But it's towards the end of that week, I'm kind of like, yeah, but I don't have as easy access to the place.
Mm-hmm.
And as that gets a little harder, that's when my body's like, it's time. Like, it's time to, revisit, because we kind of want you back in that place, right? And since I'm not going full bore, I'm basically on the 2-story bus that drives around a city. You kind of can see it from a distance, but you don't have to kind of get off the bus and go into the thing. And, I can just drive around and just look and experience, right? And yeah, so I think there's a value for me personally in doing that, but I guess there's a myriad of reasons why you might not, right? Like abuse or dependency or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of co-factors there that I don't have, but I can see other people have.
I also feel like a lot of that is like, how thin is that veil for people, right? Maybe it's so thin that, like, yeah, I'm good right now. And some people might slip back into the, death and taxes routine and need a little shakeup.
And that's the part where I'd say the one downside of this, Kayse, and I'd love to hear your reflection on this, is that my veil has gotten so thin, to use this same vernacular, that when I get into a death and taxes conversation, because that's what humans do, I have an increasingly littler patience threshold, and it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And
that comes up a lot for people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Does it?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's actually kind of a problem. Like,
yeah.
Look, man, without microdosing, I have a neighbor who will be like, "Hey, lovely weather," and I'm like, "Where are we supposed to go with this?"
Yeah.
Like what? Like, I can't do small talk, man.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about the multiverse. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's 65 and sunny. What do you want?
Yeah. So how do you deal with it, Kayse? What's your sort of, how do you?
It's absolutely, it comes up often, and it becomes the practice is learning to straddle the spiritual world and the muggle world, we call it, right?
I love that you use that term. I've used yeah.
Crazy is it that Harry Potter is so ingrained in culture now that, like,
I mean, it's a perfect descriptor, though, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Everybody knows what it means. Like, it completely adequately describes the situation.
What's going on, and those who can see and those who don't. Yeah.
So that straddle, though, Kayse, how do we advise people to sort of straddle? Because I mean, I'm asking for myself above anyone else, but I mean, I think if everybody's got this problem, I mean, it seems like valuable intel.
Well, to circle back with what you started with in the beginning of our conversation about what is consciousness, I mean, to me, is that it's the increasing mastery of being able to stretch across these realms, right? And bring the spiritual into the muggle, right? It's not to constantly want to escape here. And that's why I love microdosing, because it helps bring that spiritual side, that eternal side, into the everyday reality here in the world. I think we used to have that. I think for a very long time on Earth, we had that in our culture. Our culture is just very absent that quality at that point.
Right. And that's what I get on my kids a lot about being on their phone. I'm like, in and of itself, I don't really care about the phone so much, but I care that you're doing reps at a gym of isolation from other people. And I know it feels like you're talking to a million people, because you are technically, but that's not how humans like recharge. Like, we get more human by talking, touching, feeling, hearing other humans. Like, and
being in the environment, existing in nature. Yeah.
Over perfect example for me, I loved yoga class pre-pandemic, and I tried to do all these online yoga classes, and I was like, you know what? The group energy is really what I felt I really liked, and I didn't know that until the group was taken away.
Thank you for speaking to that. It's a huge part of the power of the group experience. And that's another thing our culture has really gotten away from. I think because the last 40, 50 years, the therapy models are all one-on-one. Like, let's focus on you and your past exclusively and talk around that in a vacuum, right? And so people often, especially a few years ago in my group programs, used to be very reluctant to do group work because they had never done it before. And it's so powerful. I immediately saw people in a group experience what took people 6 months on their own would achieve the same results in 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
When they had a small focus group of like 8 to 12 people.
But that makes total sense, right?
Totally.
Like, I mean, it absolutely makes, I mean, so much of the world, especially the world we're talking about right now, is really rooted in nuance, right? And like, and I'm in technology, and, you know, one of the things that I try to explain to my clients is like, you want us to build an iPhone app or an e-commerce site or something, and you're thinking of it as like a straight line, but like the reality is what we build is foundationed on nuance. Like, your customers need to be able to take a journey through your thing in a very specific way that's different than the next guy. And the way we suss that out is by getting 20 people on a call and like doing it, because everyone can bring their nuance perception to a joint conversation where we could then be like, oh yeah, you know what? I didn't think of that. Let's bring that part in. Let's bring that part in. And then when you take that and Venn diagram it over, say, a microdosing thing or a yoga class, it's got all the same hallmarks, right? Like, you know, hey, this person brings a little bit of this kind of thing to the party. This person brings a little bit of that thing. And if I'm only doing it one-on-one, it might take me 30 sessions to come to that same realization.
Exactly.
But if I'm in a group and this guy and this gal come up with it all at one time, and you're like, yeah, that's it. I'll take that. I'll take that. Thank you. And here's something for you guys. And, you know, and I just think that it's just such a more fluid way of doing it. And I don't know, I feel like we're losing that. You can get it back, but it takes a Herculean act of volition to do it, right? You have to like really, really go for it and find people that microdose.
You know, Matt, I would say that's even with like, you know, I did a lot of Qigong seminars, meditation seminars, these things, right? Even community acupuncture, right? I think people that do community acupuncture are using it wrong. Right. And I hate to say that, right? Like, come to my clinic if you want to work on an individual health benefit. But that I don't even want to say Jungian kind of like, you know, collective consciousness. But like, when you do a group acupuncture session, you do a meditation session with a group of people, or Qigong, it feels different, right? There's a group harmony, a group rhythm that you can't replicate. And what used to upset me is I go do these seminars and then I come home and practice, and it wasn't as powerful. Like, it wasn't as like, I didn't have that communitas or whatever there where we're all moving in that direction. So, you know, it's kind of nice to see that even though, yes, people are taking the individual substances at their dose when they need to, that there is this collective of that, you know?
Absolutely. But I think the more we structure ourselves like the forest, like nature, and get back to recognizing that and taking a cue from that, the better off we'll be. Yeah.
So when you look at your practice, like the people that are doing this, like, is there a, you know, I mean, in weightlifting, right? You can kind of do weightlifting, that light weights, but that one day where you go completely crazy and like you're lifting crazy heavy, like, do you see sort of extra value in sort of undulating between like occasional, like full deep dives and like, you know?
I love this question. Thank you for bringing this up. Yeah, I mean, it's happened organically and naturally, and that's the way I think it's meant to be. Mainly, I don't feel aligned with the medicalization of these medicines.
Okay.
And so I've been reflecting.
Talk to me about that real quick. What does that mean?
I don't feel aligned increasingly with people going to a clinic and being in a white room with an eye shade and being administered psilocybin, and that being the way these medicines are brought to the world. So I've been paying a lot more attention, learning from nature, learning from ancient practice, and I've been studying the Greek practice of the Eleusinian mysteries. That happened over 2,000 years, and it was a sacred sacrament. They believe that ergot was probably the medicine used. And it was a cultural centerpiece of their society where it was a once a year. Mysteries were in September of each year, but the lesser mysteries actually began in February of that year. So people would be, you kind of had to be accepted into them. It was by nomination, and to make it equal across society, the fee, so to speak, for the mysteries to participate was 2 months of your salary. That way, if you were a slave, that was, different than salary than being a
somebody
royal.
else, yeah.
Right, and made it accessible to all. But you would actually begin preparing for the mysteries over the course of the year with diet, with purification rituals, with rites. And then you would prepare your body, mind, spirit for the mysteries in September. I love this, and this is the way people do when they start with microdosing. I work with a lot of beginners who, for a variety of reasons, are afraid of or have a lot of stigma around high dose experiences. But as soon as they start microdosing, they trust the medicine, they get connected to themselves, they have gifts and so many positive benefits across the board. They're naturally drawn to work at higher doses.
Yeah.
So 4 or 5 years in now, in our community, we have people now who have been practicing and are quite accomplished psychonauts at this point, because they have experimented with not only high doses, but also mini doses and different stages of medicine.
Right.
Learning to work in different liminal states and navigate different levels of liminal states, and brought that back to the community. So I hope in the future, I would love to see it begin, as you said, like an arc of experience over time, that people utilize microdosing and some of the lower doses to prepare themselves for a high dose journey. For so many reasons, I think that's more beneficial
Sure.
to do it that way. And then it's something over time we hold very differently, with more reverence and respect when held that way than
Right.
just like, I can go do this on a weekend, right?
And I do think that there's like a lot of interesting, again, nuance there, because, I have the most experience on the LSD side, and I've had, luckily, the people that I've worked with were chemistry accurate, if that makes sense. Like, they knew exactly what we were doing. So I realized very quickly that, having 150, 160 milligram mics wasn't so different from having 10. The only difference was the depth of introspection and ability to peel apart the nuance, right? Like it was deeper, but it wasn't necessarily different. And that was kind of like an interesting realization, because I think me too, I'm also a product of the DARE generation. And I also, every time, no matter how open-minded I am, I still think, hell, every time somebody passes a joint around, I'm like, in my brain, there's a part of me that still goes, this is a drug, this is bad, I'm going to lose my shit and end up in a corner. None of that is
somebody's wagging their finger at you.
You know what I mean? And none of that's going to happen. I know that. Rationally, I know that. But there's a piece of me that I just can't fucking let go of. And it drives me bonkers, because it happens 100% of the time. And I now can move past it. I consider it almost like a limp. It's like, if I broke my leg and I have a limp the rest of my life, and I don't think about it every day, but I just figured out ways around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I figure this is just my limp, right? Like, it's like this little vestigial thing that's never going to go away. But like, when I realized it's all the same, like all this is an allowing me to go deeper and wider. And that's good. Like I love, not every day. I don't know that I would,
You know what,
count
Matt,
that on a Monday.
I gotta jump back to something Kayse said. She brought up these Eleusinian rites, right? And that's a Greek origin. But like, what amazes me is when we see cultures coming to the same kind of outcomes with very different backgrounds, right? So you're talking about dieta in South America and things like that. You're talking about these rites and rituals before you do the thing. So it's always amazing where you see this cultural overlap by two cultures that weren't talking. Right, or talking as we would think. Or
separated by thousands of miles or thousands
of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is so crazy that these kind of medicines all come out to the same thing. And it's like, it speaks to the humanity of it, and also this kind of supernatural quality of it, Sorry, I just had to get that out, because I'm like, oh, that sounds like ayahuasca ceremonies. That sounds like combo ceremonies. That sounds like 10,000 other ways of doing this. And it's so amazing that even though the substance is different, the culture is different, the rights might be different, the ideas are still there and they're universal, those principles.
Yeah, it's like 42.
Yeah, exactly. It's always 42.
It's always 42. Why? What's the question? Don't know. The answer is 42, though. And I just always laughed at that because I'm like, that's kind of this, right? Yeah, I don't know what the original question was, but we all came to the same answer. Like it just doesn't matter how many times you ask the question, it's always the same answer. So how do you see, I mean, look, it sounds like you're super excited about where we're at, like as a collective soul. Like, how do you see this kind of bouncing down the path from here forward? Let's talk future tense now, right?
How out there do you want to go?
Listen, man, I feel like we've already gotten pretty far out there, so I don't really know that there's a boundary at this point, but I mean...
Can I say we're going extinct? Is it too early for that?
No, it's definitely not too early for that.
That sounds amazing. Bring it on.
Yeah.
Honestly, Kayse, what we found is people tend to taper off around minute 46, so you just go. Just go. The ones that are diehards are here with us.
Yeah.
Good news, bad news. Good news, bad news. Yeah, what I have seen and been shown through my own work is that we are at the end of humanity as we currently know it. And we are in a becoming process of, I call it a better brand coming in. And so we're starting to see real time across humanity. Kind of like when humans branched out into different humans in the past and we, sapiens won out, I think we're undergoing a similar happening right now, where in the coming years, there are going to be people who lean in toward the future, developing your consciousness, developing presence, developing emotional awareness, are all about creating beauty and art in this world. And then there are also going to be a different branch of humans that almost go backward.
Fucking Neanderthals.
We're seeing it, every week in my community and with my clients and my calls, you see it as people are really regressing right now, almost going into childlike behaviors, obstinate, tribalism, and or doing the work to develop their consciousness. Art. I think we're on the cusp of, we're going to see a beautiful creative renaissance that we haven't experienced in our lifetime.
I'm with you 100% on that one for sure.
I think we're going to see such a resurgence in the creative arts across the board as this takes hold. And so I think the future right now, why I do this work fundamentally is I think we're seeding the future for this more conscious, kind of better brand of human.
So when you said extinct, you don't mean like we're all going to disappear. You just mean like our current lineage is going to bifurcate and we're sort of going to become a new thing. Like it's not, right.
Yes.
And that's funny how accurate I think you are.
And I also think that's going to terrify some of those people that are still clutching to old stuff. But how liberating is that?
Mm-hmm.
I can put down stuff I don't need.
Yes. Well, and I think what it takes right now, we're seeing so many examples of the seeding of this future, but we are reacting with fear to it. Because that's what we're conditioned to do. So that's all across the board, whether it's weather events, instead of going, well, what are these weather events telling us, instead of just trying to control them and fight against them, like nature's going to win. Nature's always going to win out. But little things I see every week in the news. So far,
nature, 3 billion and gazillion. Humans, 0.
Right. So we're so we don't see through the eyes of nature. We don't see through the eyes of spirit that a lot of these happenings that we're resisting, right, are trying to actually push us into our future. Like a really obvious one is like, well, we have these where we can't do these processed foods, or like the baby food factory failing and we've got to go fly and buy fake baby food from another country. It's like, instead of reacting to that and continuing what we've always done, why don't we invent new ways of doing things? Because that is going to push our evolution forward. And so increasingly in the years ahead, I think we're going to run into these situations where we can't create workarounds anymore. And we're kind of forced into novelty just because of sheer chaos. I mean, a lot of people in the US, I know, are really, really nervous about impending chaos. And I'm 20 of the coming year. And in the silver linings to me is in a lot of ancient cultures, the word chaos is interchangeable with magic. So it's up to us to create the magic that's going to carry us into the future.
And it's so funny that you touched on this, because just this morning in this call meeting again, we sort of touched on this similarly, in that, let's just say that you are on one side of the equation. And I think what you're touching on is like the political uncertainty, like that we just entered into in the US, right? On one side of that, yeah, it could be tumultuous, but on the other side of it, it does sort of give you front and center the option of going one way or the other, right? So you can either get in line for your hot dog and vitamin smoothie while you sit in a chair and watch movies the rest of your life, like a la Idiocracy, a la Wall-E
or something like that. Yeah.
Or you can go the other way and take full autonomy over your future and your mind, and realize the connection between your mind and your soul and your body, and do something with that. But you don't really have a way to sit on the sidelines anymore, right? Like at that point, you either go one way or the other. And what we talked about today was going one way is going to harm or kill a huge portion of people, like a ton. But it'll make the other people have a much more fluid existence. And so you can sort of choose, like, which side of that equation do you want to be on? But I still think right now, maybe this is overly optimistic, but I still think people have that choice. To your point, I think that choice will be removed in the not so distant future. Like if you haven't picked a side, it's going to pick for you. And you're either going to be on one end or the other, and it sucks. It really does. But you have to almost like lean into the bad part of that to see the good part of it. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And choosing, are we going to continue to kind of patch up what is fundamentally broken, or are we going to be forced to create new systems?
Correct. And even for your health, like, I mean, I've taken a very different approach to health than all of my family, most of my friends. And I think, I don't even think, I know most of them think I'm fucking bad shit.
It makes you an outlier. It totally makes you an outlier. But I don't think that's wrong, because that's where I don't want to use the word progress, but I think that's where it lies, right? It doesn't, sitting around the fire is great, but like, unless you're looking out off into the darkness, where do you learn anything new? Where do you see anything new? Did I just make like a Plato the cave reference there? Did I like that felt Socratic somehow? I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Like, evolution is based on mutation. Right? Yeah. And it's always the outlier. It's always the mutant that takes humanity or any life form forward.
The fish that grows legs and crawls out of the pond. Yeah.
And so I think in the coming years, we're going to see a whole lot of weird. And because we're fearful beings, based on our historical, we're going to kill it. We're going to kill it. And that the monkeys we are. And
we've got it sick. Somebody will sleep with it, though. Sorry, it's got to go two ways. Somebody's going to find it very fascinating. Somebody's going to kill it.
Exactly. And so I think it's important for people to not to view things with curiosity as they happen. Like the neurodivergency is a perfect example. Everyone is freaking out and so fast to medicate it and relegate it and control for it, when it's actually like, what if that is the future?
Yeah, what is that? What if that is evolution? Yeah.
Well, there was a crazy book, Denial, I think it was.
Denial's a good book. Yeah.
That book is nuts, because it's postulated that the reason why Homo sapiens outbred every other one is that despite Neanderthals having a bigger actual brain than we do, is that we were the first species to understand and move past the concept of our own mortality. And the outliers in the Neanderthal and all the other Denisonians and all the other versions of hominids that have existed, the one or two people that figured out, fuck, we're all going to die, they were the weirdos and no one would have sex with them. So they had no kids and that shit never passed on. We did. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we figured it out and we all had sex and had a bunch more of us. And now all of a sudden everyone's like, yeah, we're all going to fucking
we were
die.
the ones going, we're going to die anyway.
Yeah. And so like, if you look at it through that lens, Kayse, what you're saying, that could be that same inflection moment now where there's a bunch of us that are like, yeah, we got to just fucking take these compounds, explore our consciousness, do the thing, because that's the only way we survive. And then we all have sex and have more of those things. And maybe that outbreeds the other one. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's a little weird, but at the same time, it's like, if that concept is right, that moment in that anthropological moment could be now. I mean, who knows?
Well, it's already happening in terms of our fertility. Our fertility is dropping exponentially. People in the health community are starting to freak out about it, that this is a bad thing, of course, and how do we fix this? But what if this is exactly by design? Right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where that's where we start Venn diagramming with that, like, this part's going to go away, this part's going to get better. You know what I mean? Like, and, how do you sort of go through? I mean, one of the reasons why everyone thinks we're nuts on this show is because, like, we talk about things that took thousands of hours of, like, digging and soul searching to come up with. And people are like, that's such a luxury that you guys have, that you could actually spend that amount of time thinking about this and doing that work. And I'm like, you're not wrong. I mean, if I had 3 jobs and 2 kids as a single parent, and I'm like running around just trying to, Maslow this fucking...
Yeah, it's almost beyond Maslow, right?
Yeah, right. You're like, I can't even, first of all, I can't empathize with that because that's not my story. So it's really hard for me to even understand, like, would I be as expansive if I was in that spot? Probably not. In which case, I'm sort of on the other side of the equation, not by choice, but by circumstance. And how many of those people would opt for a level up if they had an option? Does that make sense? So it's like a very complicated situation morally and philosophically in my brain, right? It gets a little sticky. Because even like microdosing, you have to have resources, right? Like, you're not free. The medicines aren't free. Like, it's discretionary income at its absolute finest, right? Like, it's not,
that's
water.
A weird one. I would say, if we're talking about something like mushrooms, yes, they cost something, but this is not like the finest pound of cocaine you've ever had either. I think the entry level is not as high, but you have to have the mindset. And I think what you're talking about is the person that's worried about, hey, how am I going to feed the kids? How am I going to do like that? Those basic material needs aren't being met. So how can I have a consciousness conversation when I'm literally trying to survive? It's still that reptilian brain going, I just got to get through this. So when we get past that, that's when these conversations happen.
And Kayse, all these people too. The $25,000 weekends in the Sierra.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I think one of the things I have learned across my decades of supporting people in healing in any modality, the fundamental thing that probably helps people heal and grow the most is safety. It is feeling safe. And it sounds so simple.
It sounds so simple.
Our culture is so based in these survival modalities, right? And I think that the primary thing that is going to do us in as a species is greed. Greed of fundamentally not understanding that once you have more than you need, and you're taking from other people to have more than you need, it brings down the whole ship, right? And so I think a lot of cultures who function unlike ours on a mode of enoughness, they're abundant because they have what they need to feel safe and secure. They don't need to microdose. Right?
Yeah, right.
They're already thriving and happy, and certain people don't need that to evolve, if that makes sense.
No, totally.
I think we've dug ourselves in such a mindset of scarcity and fear in the West that we need something to crawl out of it.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting.
Are you saying our lives are too good?
Yeah. Well, it is funny. My wife works for a company that's multinational, and like one of their higher ups is from, I think, Amsterdam or something. And he was here on a business trip, and he said something funny like, "You guys in America don't have real problems, so you guys just make shit up. Like you're just fabricating things to be problems. Because like, come to my house, fucking problems exist, like real problems, like actual human based problems, and this shit is not a problem. Like, and I'm like, yeah, he's probably right. I mean." But again, it's like, I don't know, when you have all that, like, what are you going to complain about? I feel like we have to complain about something. I mean, how boring would it be if we had nothing to complain about? Like, Kayse, what, I mean, honestly, I need
this is going to be a 3-hour
I need a month to talk to you. But in deference to the fact that we all have other things to do than sit here all day, what haven't we covered, and how do we find you? How do we what's the future for you, and how do we find people to connect with you? Like, how do we do this? Let's get there.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for this combo. I love talking with folks on this
level. This is the whole reason we're doing this.
I thought we started so fast and furious. I'm like, oh man, this woman thinks we're fucking nuts. She's hanging out and he's hanging out.
No, I love it. I love connecting. So I love especially working with beginners, people who are a little nervous, who do have a lot of stigma are coming in and they're not sure if it's for them. I love working with people of all ages. So you can find me at Microdosing for Healing. We have a podcast, we have programs, we have a community. Our community is like the best way. I created it because, 5 years ago, no one had even heard of this. So you kind of had to seek it out, and people already had like a certain basis coming in. Now the problem is there's almost too much information, and people are like going down these Reddit rabbit holes and coming in and with a lot of misinformation. And so the community was a really accessible way for people just to kind of dip their toe in. Experienced people who've been doing this work for a long time, and also to be able to see people from all walks of life and background that are doing this work. I think that's the best way to learn. I think we're really moving away from kind of book learning and academic memorization. We're going to see real soon why. And moving into learning from each other's experience. Our stories, our shared experience, more of an apprentice style like we used to do. So it's invaluable for someone who's new or is fearful to just kind of come in and hang out and listen and learn from other people who are pretty experienced at this stuff at this point. So that's me.
I mean, it's such a great idea. I wish there was more of that. We're on the East Coast and it kind of sucks. We're like the dark ages of everything cool. Like everything comes here.
No. There's a whole no.
Stop it.
No, don't do that.
What the hell did we invent over here?
No one invented anything, first of all. Second of all, we're like, no, I'm not going to, because if I say flyover state, we might piss somebody off in like Wyoming or something.
That's okay. I like Wyoming. Nothing wrong with Wyoming.
But I mean, we're not dark ages. We're just, like we don't get all the hippy dippy stuff first.
Yeah, but see, that's where but Mark Twain had a fun quote that like went something like, spend time in San Francisco, not so long that you're soft. Spend time in New York, not so long
that you're hard.
Hard. And then like die in Colorado or something. I forget what the whole thing was, but it was basically like, and I grew up in California in the North Bay. I lived in New Jersey and New York City and all this stuff. And like, I kind of think that there's a lot of fun knowledge in that because and that's what I think the East Coast misses a lot though. It's that hardness, that edge that made New York City famous, but it also closes you off to a lot. Right. And what makes California famous is all the expansive stuff. But it's a little too porous and a little too soft.
I literally had somebody that was like, you got to move to California. And I'm like, fuck them pussies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, I've been in Baltimore a little too long. I'm sorry.
I gotta move.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean that. They're lovely people. They're a bit soft.
That's absolutely right. But I feel like that's kind of where I was going with the East Coast. It's just a little too rigid, and by the time it gets here, it's been filtered so much that it's not even the same thing, which is kind of cool sometimes, but sort of annoying in others, right?
Well, one of the accidents, not an accident, was, I did in-person work for my whole life. And if you told me I would be working on little screens,
yeah, right,
like this, I would have never believed it a few years ago. But like, it's what was meant to be, I think, is to be able to bring this work to the world. And I think when you're in California, it's such a little bubble, you can talk, and now it's like we have people from Iowa and Egypt and Queensland and all over the place to be able to bring different perspective in. And I really love among my favorite folks in our community are my like New Englanders and East Coasters, because they bring a lot of times they bring a skepticism to it and an intellectualism to it that is actually very valuable to like see it through that lens as well. I think it offers it a lot of credibility, that they bring to it, and the science, for better, for worse.
Right.
They're focused on science really in our modern moment. To me, like science is like the church used to be, or the king used to be.
But it's funny you talked about the walls, the white walls, and meanwhile the Hopkins psilocybin lab is literally 3 miles from my house, right? So it's like,
yeah, we both applied for studies.
Yeah,
we're like,
literally right.
You want to give
right
us drugs? Sure. Are you a gambler?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Wait, did I just disqualify? How much? I played a scratch off a couple of times a month ago. Does that count? Yeah. No.
What's the right answer? What answer gets me into the study?
Yeah.
Are you
hilarious.
A smoker? Smoking what? No.
What was really funny, Kayse, is they go, listen, I'm going to not tell this publicly, but you're a white dude. We can't have more white dudes in this study. I'm just going to be.
This has literally been every study we've done has been white dudes.
Yeah. Which I'm like sitting there going, why is it that only white dudes want to go trip their face off to
Well, I mean,
experiment?
that's across research. You know, they're normally getting college-age white males because those are the ones that are on those campuses.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So they basically were like, yeah, I don't care if you gamble or not, but you can't beat the white dude out of you. So
yeah, that's pretty much it.
So wait, your thing is like microdose through healing, you said? Sorry,
Microdosing for healing, and I am all over the interwebs. That's me.
We'll pull all that stuff out for sure. But, and like, is this you guys meet weekly, monthly, annually, quarterly?
We have lots of different programs. So our immersion programs are usually 6 weeks in length. In 2025, for the first time ever, we're doing a program that's a microdosing tapering program. We've had lots and lots of people who are coming to microdosing who want to move off pharma drugs.
Oh, I see.
Simultaneously. So we're doing a hybrid program for the first time just for those folks, because you can microdose on a lot of these medications. It's just a very, very different experience in the process. We're giving those folks their own container. And then the community, we usually meet 2 or 3 times a month in group gathering, like coaching calls, so folks can ask questions and share their experience. But we also bring in guest experts, many of whom are underground practitioners.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I love this idea because, like, again, I do think that people feel infinitely more at peace with the concept spending an hour talking to me about the experience and everything than they did in a Reddit rabbit hole, right? Like, and and I'm not tooting my own or our own horn, because Tom and I and the people we hang out with all kind of have that same effect. But like people, I mean, the genesis of this show was people saying, I need to press pause on your conversation so I can go look something up because I didn't quite understand like the thing. And then they come back and they're like, all right, I got all this new information. What do you think of this, and that? And then we can kind of further parse it. But like, you kind of need that back and forth because you really can't self-diagnose this stuff. Like, I feel like it's very hard. I mean, I've used and abused everyone I know for information everywhere I can. Right. I'm like, oh, you have information that I don't. How do I get that out of you? How can I, what do you want to trade? You want this information from me? How do I get that? Because it just builds like Legos, right? You're just like, you just keep stacking, right? And it's never ending and it's fun. So cool. Kayse, I love this. Thank you so much for sharing time with us.
This was great.
This was awesome.
Great.
We will rack and stack all your socials and everything and put them on there, and we'll have everybody pointing your way. But in the meantime, have a wonderful holiday season and whatever that means to you.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. I think this is our last show before the new year.
Is it?
So, yeah, I think so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're good, which means we could actually finally catch up. Kayse,
we're not that far behind, Kayse. It won't be, June before we hear you.
We did these before we put the first one online, just because we're like, nobody wants to hear this. And then we put it on and we're like, oh, look, people actually want to hear it.
People are listening.
so. But thanks again. Enjoy the weekend, guys. And we'll talk in the new year.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.